A millionaire was humiliated for looking poor, and look what happened a day later. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. The luxurious restaurant, Golden Light, shone like a jewel in the heart of the city. Its enormous windows reflected the city lights, while inside, the elite enjoyed exquisite dishes in an atmosphere of opulence and exclusivity. Amidst the clinking of crystal glasses and the murmur of refined conversations, a modest-looking man approached the entrance. James Miller, at 45, was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country, though few knew it. His minimalist lifestyle and aversion to ostentation had kept him out of the public eye for years. Dressed in worn jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and sneakers, James approached the maitre d', a tall, slender man named Henry, who looked him up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Good evening. I'd like a table for one, please," James said calmly. Henry, used to going unnoticed, tried to reason. "I understand the dress code, but I see several empty tables from here. Are you sure you can't make an exception?" The situation caught the attention of Sarah, a young, ambitious waitress who approached the maitre d'. "Is there a problem, Henry?" she asked curiously. "Nothing important, Sarah. Just explaining to this gentleman that he doesn't meet our standards," Henry replied with a tone of superiority. Sarah looked at James, and instead of showing compassion, she saw an opportunity to ingratiate herself with her superior. With a forced smile, she addressed the millionaire. "Sir, perhaps it would be better if you found a place more suited to your style. There's a cafe on the corner that might be more appropriate." James, feeling indignation rise within him, decided to make one last attempt. "I assure you, I can pay for the dinner. Money is not a problem." Henry let out a derisive laugh. "Sir, this is not a place for jokes. I ask you to leave before we have to call security." At that moment, a young waiter named David joined the scene. Unlike his colleagues, David seemed uncomfortable with the situation. "Henry, maybe we should," he began to say, but was brusquely interrupted. "David, mind your own business." "I've got this," snapped Henry. James, wounded in his pride but maintaining his composure, looked at each of the present before speaking. "Very well. I will leave, but I assure you, this moment will not be forgotten." As he walked away from the restaurant, James could hear the mocking laughter of Henry and Sarah, who watched the scene with a mix of embarrassment and concern. What none of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. James Miller was not just a millionaire. He was the owner of one of the largest tech companies in the country and, coincidentally, an old friend of the owner of Golden Light. While walking down the sidewalk, away from the restaurant's golden glow, James took out his phone and dialed a number. "Mark, it's James. I need a favor." The following 2 days were a flurry of activity for James Miller. The incident at Golden Light had awakened in him a desire for justice that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about personal revenge. James saw an opportunity to teach a valuable lesson about respect and equality. In his spacious apartment, James met with Mark Johnson, owner of Golden Light, and his friend from college. Mark, a burly man with a hearty laugh and thick mustache, listened with growing incredulity to the account of what had happened. "I can't believe it, James. I swear I had no idea my staff could behave like this," exclaimed Mark, visibly upset. "I've always tried to instill values of respect and service in my restaurant." James, seated in his favorite chair, nodded understandingly. "I know, Mark. That's why I want us to handle this in a way that serves as a lesson, not just for your staff but for everyone." While the two friends discussed the details of the plan, elsewhere in the city, life continued for the employees of Golden Light. Sarah, the ambitious waitress, arrived at her small apartment after another exhausting shift. At 28, she dreamed of moving up in the world of luxury dining and saw her job at Golden Light as a stepping stone to success. "Honey, I'm home," she announced as she closed the door behind her. Her boyfriend, John, a young lawyer struggling to establish himself at a prestigious firm, greeted her with a kiss. "How was your day, my love?" Sarah collapsed on the couch, exhaling a sigh of exhaustion. "As usual. Though today we had a funny incident with a guy who looked like a homeless person trying to get into the restaurant. You should have seen how we kicked him out." John frowned, not convinced. "Don't you think you were a bit harsh?" Maybe he just wanted to dine. "Oh, John, you're too kind," replied Sarah with a condescending tone. "In this business, you have to know how to discern. We can't let just anyone in and ruin the experience for the clients that really matter." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, David, the young waiter who had shown discomfort at the situation, was having dinner with his mother in their modest family home. "Mom, do you think I was wrong not to defend that man at the restaurant?" asked David, stirring his plate of pasta distractedly. His mother, a kind-faced woman with gray hair, looked at him tenderly. "Son, you should always follow your heart. If you felt it was wrong, maybe next time you should speak up." David nodded thoughtfully. At 24, he was still learning to navigate the complexities of the working and social world. The incident with the modest-looking man had left him with a feeling of unease that he couldn't shake. Back in James' apartment, the plan was taking shape. Mark, still dismayed by what had happened, had agreed to participate in the lesson his friend wanted to impart. "So, are you sure about this, James?" asked Mark, scratching his head. "Don't you think it's a bit extreme?" James stood up and walked to the window, observing the city lights. "Sometimes, Mark, people need a shock to really learn. I don't want to ruin lives. I just want them to understand the impact of their actions and prejudices." Mark nodded slowly. "All right, I trust you, my friend. You've always had good judgment, even if your taste in clothes leaves much to be desired," he added with a smile. James laughed, appreciating the moment of levity. "Tomorrow will be an interesting day, I can assure you." While the two friends finalized the details, night fell over the city. At golden light, Henry closed the restaurant, satisfied with another successful day, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. The stage was set, the actors unaware of their roles, and James Miller was ready to orchestrate a lesson none of them would ever forget. The morning of the third day dawned with a palpable sense of anticipation, at least for James and Mark. For the rest of the staff at Golden Light, it was a day like any other, or so they thought. Henry arrived early at the restaurant, as was his custom, impeccably dressed in his maitre d' suit, beginning to oversee the preparations for lunch service. Sarah soon arrived, greeting her colleagues with her usual energy. "Good morning, everyone," she said with a smile. "Ready for another day of excellence?" David, who had just walked in, replied with a timid "good morning," still reflecting on the events of 2 nights ago. The morning passed uneventfully until around noon when Mark Johnson, the restaurant owner, made an unusual entrance. Normally, Mark visited the establishment in the afternoons, so his presence at that hour caused some surprise among the staff. "Mr. Johnson, what a surprise to see you so early," greeted Henry, quickly approaching his boss. Mark, with an unusually serious expression, nodded briefly. "Henry, I need you to gather all the staff in the main dining room. We have a special guest today, and I want everyone to be present." Intrigued and a bit worried, Henry began to gather the staff. In a few minutes, all the employees, from waiters to cooks, were in the elegant main dining room, murmuring among themselves and speculating about the reason for this impromptu meeting. Mark stood before them, his imposing figure immediately capturing everyone's attention. "Thank you for gathering so quickly. As I mentioned, we have a very special guest today, someone who, I'm afraid, was not treated with the respect he deserves on a recent visit to our establishment." A murmur of confusion ran through the group. Henry and Sarah exchanged nervous glances, while David felt his heart start to beat faster. At that moment, the restaurant doors opened, and James Miller walked in, dressed exactly as he had 2 nights ago. Worn jeans, a plain white t-shirt, and sneakers. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Henry visibly paled, recognizing the man he had thrown out of the restaurant instantly. Sarah raised a hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp of surprise. David, for his part, felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Mark approached James and, to everyone's astonishment, embraced him warmly. "Friends," he said, addressing the staff, "I present to you James Miller, my lifelong friend and, more importantly, one of the most successful and respected entrepreneurs in our country." The shock was palpable. Henry seemed on the verge of fainting, while Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the floor, her face red with shame. James stepped forward, his presence filling the room despite his simple attire. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice calm but firm. "2 nights ago, I tried to dine at this beautiful restaurant. Unfortunately, I was judged by my appearance and treated in a way that I'm sure does not reflect the values Mark tries to instill in this establishment." The employees listened in a hushed silence, the magnitude of what had happened dawning on them like a heavy weight. "I am not here to seek revenge," James continued. "I am here to teach an important lesson about respect, dignity, and the danger of snap judgments." Mark spoke again. "What happened is unacceptable and goes against everything Golden Light stands for. We've built our reputation not just on culinary excellence, but on treating all our customers equally and with respect." James nodded, appreciating his friend's words. "However," he added, "I believe this situation requires more than words. It requires action." The tension in the room heightened. Henry, mustering all his courage, stepped forward. "Mr. Johnson, I take full responsibility for what happened. It was my decision and my mistake. I am deeply ashamed and sorry." James looked at him intently, assessing the sincerity of his words. "I appreciate your honesty, Henry, but I fear you were not the only one involved in the incident." Sarah, feeling it was her moment to speak, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "I also participated, sir. My words were cruel and unjustified. I am very sorry." David, who had remained silent, finally found his voice. "Mr. Miller, I didn't say anything to defend you that night. I felt uncomfortable with the situation but didn't have the courage to speak up. I'm very sorry." James observed the 3 employees, considering their words. Then, with a sigh, he addressed the entire staff. "What happened that night is a reflection of a broader problem in our society. We judge people by their appearance, by how they dress, how they speak, without taking the time to truly know them. In my case, I have the means to respond to this unfair treatment. But what about those who don't?" Mark spoke again. "As a result of this incident, we've decided to take drastic measures. Henry, Sarah, I regret to inform you that you are both terminated with immediate effect." A collective gasp ran through the room. Henry seemed to age 10 years in an instant, while Sarah broke into tears. "As for the rest of the staff," Mark continued, "you will undergo intensive training on customer service, diversity, and inclusion. I will not allow something like this to happen again in my establishment." James raised his hand, asking for the floor. "If I may add something." "David." The young waiter stepped forward, trembling slightly. "Your honesty in admitting your inaction is admirable. Sometimes, remaining silent in the face of injustice is as harmful as perpetrating it. However, I see in you the potential to learn and grow. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a position in my company. I believe your experience here, combined with this lesson, will make you an excellent advocate for equality and respect in the workplace." David, stunned, could barely mumble a thank you, while his colleagues looked at him with a mix of surprise and envy. Henry and Sarah, still in shock from their dismissal, were preparing to leave the restaurant when James stopped them. "One moment, please. Though your actions were unacceptable, I believe in second chances. I propose this. You will spend a month working as volunteers at a soup kitchen. If, after that time, you've shown genuine change in your attitude and behavior, I will reconsider your employment situation, either here or at one of my companies." The surprise on Henry and Sarah's faces was evident. This was not the retaliation they expected, but a chance for redemption they weren't sure they deserved. Mark, visibly moved by his friend's generosity, addressed the staff. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of true class and compassion. I hope we all learn from this experience and become better people and professionals." As the staff began to disperse, still processing the morning's events, James approached Mark. "Do you think we've been too harsh?" he asked quietly. Mark shook his head. "You've been fair and compassionate, my friend. This lesson will resonate not only with them, but with everyone who hears this story." What none of them knew was that this incident was about to trigger a series of events that would forever change not only the lives of those involved, but also public perception of equal treatment in the service industry. As James and Mark left the restaurant, the employees began to disperse, each lost in their own thoughts and reflections. The lesson had been harsh but necessary, and for some, like Sarah, the consequences of their actions were far from over. The days following the incident at Golden Light were a whirlwind of emotions and changes for everyone involved. The news of Henry and Sarah's dismissal spread quickly through the city's luxury restaurant circle, sparking debate and reflection in the industry. For Sarah, the blow was especially hard. Not only had she lost her job, but her reputation in the industry was tarnished. Sitting on the small couch in her apartment, she held in her trembling hands the letter detailing her assignment to the soup kitchen. John, her boyfriend, entered the room with 2 cups of coffee. "How do you feel, love?" he asked, sitting beside her. Sarah looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Like my whole world has fallen apart, John. I've worked so hard to get where I was, and now, because of one stupid mistake, it's all gone." John put an arm around her, trying to console her. "It's not the end of the world. You have a chance to make things right, to show you've learned the lesson. And what if I don't succeed? What if Mr. Miller decides I don't deserve a second chance?" Sarah asked, fear evident in her voice. John was silent for a moment, considering his words. "Sarah, I have to be honest with you. What you did was wrong. I've always been worried about your obsession with climbing the ranks in the luxury dining world, how sometimes you seem to forget the humanity of people in the process." Sarah looked at him, surprised by the harshness of his words. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe this is an opportunity for you to reevaluate why you entered the hospitality industry in the first place. Wasn't it to make people happy through unforgettable experiences?" John's words hit home for Sarah. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly reflect on her actions and motivations. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, David was preparing for his first day at James Miller's company. Standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie with nervous hands, he could hardly believe the turn his life had taken. His mother entered the room, a proud smile lighting up her face. "Look at you, son. So handsome and professional." David turned to her, anxiety clear in his eyes. "Mom, what if I'm not up to the task? Mr. Miller has placed his trust in me, but—" His mother interrupted him with a hug. "David, Mr. Miller saw something special in you. He saw your heart, your ability to recognize your mistakes, and your desire to be better. That is more valuable than any work experience." Inspired by his mother's words, David took a deep breath and headed towards his new future. In his office, James Miller contemplated the city through the large windows. Mark, sitting in a leather chair, watched his friend with curiosity. "Are you sure you want to take this further, James?" Mark asked. James turned to his friend. "Mark, what happened at your restaurant is just the tip of the iceberg. How many people are judged, mistreated, or ignored every day just because of their appearance or perceived social status? I believe we have the opportunity and the responsibility to change that." Mark nodded slowly. "And what do you have in mind?" "A national awareness campaign," James replied, his eyes shining with determination. "We'll use my media influence and your network of contacts in the hospitality industry. We'll tell our story, but also the stories of others who have suffered similar discrimination." "That's ambitious," commented Mark, a smile forming on his lips. "But if anyone can do it, it's you, my friend." As James and Mark planned their campaign, at the soup kitchen across town, Henry and Sarah prepared for their first day of volunteering. The former maitre d', stripped of his elegant uniform and wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, looked apprehensively at the line of people waiting for their meal. Sarah, beside him, took a deep breath. "Well, I guess it's time to start our redemption," she said, heading to the kitchen to pick up the trays of food. What neither of them knew was that this day would mark the beginning of a profound transformation, not only in their lives but in the way society perceived and treated others, regardless of their appearance or status. As the sun set over the city, the lives of James, David, Sarah, and Henry intertwined in ways none of them could have imagined. The stage was set for significant social change, and they, unknowingly, were at the center of it all. The following weeks were a period of intense transformation for everyone involved in the incident at Golden Light. While James Miller and Mark Johnson worked tirelessly on their awareness campaign, the lives of David, Sarah, and Henry took unexpected turns. David, in his new position at James's company, found himself immersed in a world of opportunities he had never imagined. His main task was to help develop a training program on diversity and inclusion for service industry companies. Each day, he learned something new about empathy, communication, and leadership. One afternoon, while working in his office, he received an unexpected call. "David, it's Sarah," said a familiar voice on the other end of the line. David was surprised. He hadn't spoken to Sarah since the incident at the restaurant. "Sarah, what a surprise. How are you?" There was a pause before Sarah responded. "I wanted to apologize to you, David, for how I treated you at the restaurant, for how I treated everyone. Really, this time at the soup kitchen has opened my eyes." David listened attentively as Sarah recounted her experiences, how she had met people from all walks of life and circumstances, how she had learned to see beyond appearances and value the inherent dignity of every human being. "I'm happy for you, Sarah," David said sincerely. "It sounds like you've learned a lot." "I have," Sarah replied, "and I wanted to ask you if you could talk to Mr. Miller. I'd like the opportunity to show that I've changed." David promised to do what he could, moved by the transformation of his former colleague. Meanwhile, at the soup kitchen, Henry was experiencing his own epiphany. The former maitre d', used to dealing with the elite of society, now found himself serving meals to homeless people, minimum wage workers, and families struggling to make ends meet. One day, while serving soup, an elderly woman took his hand. "Thank you, son," she said with a toothless smile, "not just for the food, but for treating us like people." Those words hit Henry like a bolt of lightning. He realized that in all his years at Golden Light, he had rarely seen his clients as real people with their own stories and struggles. They had always been simply VIP clients or important reservations. That night, Henry wrote a long letter to James Miller, apologizing again for his actions and sharing what he had learned. "I have spent my entire career judging people by their appearance or status," he wrote. "Now I understand that true hospitality does not distinguish between a millionaire and someone homeless. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." In James's office, the awareness campaign was taking shape. They had collected dozens of stories from people who had experienced discrimination in restaurants, hotels, and other service establishments. The public's response was overwhelming. "James, you won't believe this," said Mark, bursting into the office with his phone in hand. "The National Restaurant Association wants to meet with us. They're interested in implementing our training program nationwide." James smiled, satisfied with the progress, but aware that there was still much work to be done. "It's a good start, Mark, but let's not forget that real change begins with each individual." While reviewing the campaign reports, James received a message from David requesting an urgent meeting. Intrigued, he agreed to see him immediately. David entered the office, visibly nervous. "Mr. Miller, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the restaurant and about the opportunity you gave me." James invited him to sit down. "I'm listening, David." "I believe Sarah and Henry deserve a second chance," David said in one breath. "I've spoken to Sarah and read Henry's letter. They've changed, sir. They've truly learned the lesson." James listened attentively as David advocated for his former colleagues, impressed by the young man's compassion and maturity. "You know, David," James finally said, "one of the most important lessons we can learn is about forgiveness and redemption. I'm glad to see you've already learned that." That night, as the city prepared for sleep, James made a decision that would change the course of several lives. He sent 2 messages, one to Sarah and one to Henry, requesting a meeting the next day in his office. The next morning, Sarah and Henry found themselves in the lobby of the imposing office building of James Miller. Both were visibly nervous, aware that this meeting could determine the course of their future careers. "Henry," Sarah greeted with a timid gesture. Henry replied with a nod. "Any idea why we're here?" Before Sarah could respond, David appeared in the lobby. "Good morning," he greeted with a warm smile. "Mr. Miller is expecting you. Please follow me." As they ascended in the elevator, a tense silence settled between them. David, perceiving the discomfort, decided to break the ice. "You know, I've been working on a very interesting project here," he began. "We're developing a training program on inclusion and customer service. I think both of you could provide valuable perspectives." Sarah and Henry exchanged surprised looks. Was this a hint about what awaited them? Upon entering James's office, They found not only the millionaire but also Mark Johnson. James invited them to sit down with a kind gesture. "Thank you for coming," James began. "I've been following your progress at the soup kitchen and reading your reflections. I must say, I'm impressed with the transformation you both have undergone." Sarah and Henry exchanged a glance, a glimmer of hope lighting up their faces. "However," James continued, "words and good intentions are not enough. True change is demonstrated with consistent actions over time." Mark intervened at this point. "We've been discussing how we could leverage your experiences and new understanding to make a real change in the industry." "Exactly. That's why I want to make you an offer. We are launching a national initiative to promote inclusion and equal treatment in the service industry. We would like both of you to be part of this project." Sarah and Henry were speechless, overwhelmed by the opportunity presented to them. "Your task," James explained, "would be to share your stories, the lessons you've learned, and help train others in the industry. It won't be easy. You'll have to face your past mistakes publicly and work hard to earn the trust of others." "I don't know what to say," Henry stammered. "It's more than we deserve." Sarah, with tears in her eyes, added, "We are deeply grateful for this opportunity, Mr. Miller. We won't let you down." "I hope not," James responded with a smile, "because the real work begins now." In the following weeks, James Miller's initiative began to take shape. Sarah and Henry, along with David, became the public faces of the campaign. They shared their stories at conferences, workshops, and in the media, highlighting how their prejudices had led them to make serious mistakes and how they had learned to see beyond appearances. The public's response was overwhelming. Many people identified with their stories, either as victims of discrimination or as individuals recognizing their own prejudices. The campaign sparked a national dialogue about equal treatment and human dignity. One day, while preparing a presentation for an important conference, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was John, her ex-boyfriend. "Sarah, I've been following your work in the news," John said. "I'm really impressed with what you've achieved. You've changed so much." Sarah smiled, feeling a mix of nostalgia and pride. "Thank you, John. It's been a difficult but rewarding journey." "I was wondering," John continued, "if you'd like to have coffee sometime to catch up." Sarah thought for a moment. "That would be nice, John, but as friends, all right? I've learned a lot about myself in these months, and I think I need to focus on my personal growth for now." John accepted, respecting her decision. Meanwhile, Henry had found a new passion in his work with marginalized communities. His experience at the soup kitchen had opened his eyes to the daily struggles of many people, and he now dedicated much of his free time to organizing charity events and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. David, for his part, had become a respected leader within James's company. His unique perspective and commitment to equality made him an invaluable asset to the team. As the campaign gained momentum, James and Mark began to see real changes in the industry. More and more restaurants and hotels were adopting inclusion policies and diversity training programs. Customers were also more aware, demanding equal treatment for everyone. One afternoon, while James observed the city from his office, reflecting on how a simple incident had triggered a movement for social change, he smiled, thinking about the lives that had been transformed, including his own. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his assistant. "Mr. Miller, you have a call from the Ministry of Labor. They want to discuss the possibility of implementing your training program nationwide in all service sectors." James smiled even more broadly. The change they had initiated was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the incident at Golden Light, and the city buzzed with a different energy. James Miller's campaign had transcended the boundaries of the hospitality industry, becoming a social movement advocating for equality and respect in all areas of life. On a sunny Sunday morning, James found himself once again at the doors of Golden Light. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Beside him were David, Sarah, and Henry, all dressed casually but elegantly. "Are you ready?" James asked with a smile. The three nodded, a mix of nerves and excitement on their faces. Together, they entered the restaurant. The interior of Golden Light had subtly changed. While it still maintained its air of elegance, there was now a more welcoming and less pretentious atmosphere. On the walls, alongside expensive paintings, hung photographs showcasing the diversity of the clients and staff. Mark greeted them with open arms. "Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you all here again." The clients in the restaurant, recognizing the now famous faces of the inclusion campaign, began to murmur with excitement. Some even approached to greet and express their support. As they made their way to their table, Sarah couldn't help but notice a young waitress watching them with admiration. She paused for a moment to speak with her. "Hello, I'm Sarah." She introduced herself with a warm smile. "I know," the young waitress replied excitedly. "I've been following your entire campaign. It's an inspiration to many of us." Sarah felt a surge of emotion. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Sophie," the waitress replied. "I started working here a month ago, right after taking the training course you developed. It completely changed my perspective on customer service." While Sarah and Sophie chatted, Henry approached the kitchen to greet the staff. To his surprise, he recognized several faces from the soup kitchen where he had volunteered. "Peter, Maria, what are you doing here?" he asked, genuinely surprised. The middle-aged man Henry remembered serving at the soup kitchen smiled broadly. "Mr. Henry, it's great to see you. Thanks to the job training program you implemented, several of us got jobs here. Mr. Johnson gave us an opportunity." Henry felt a lump form in his throat. The circle had closed in the most beautiful way possible. Meanwhile, David was chatting animatedly with a group of clients who recognized him. He was telling them about the latest developments in the campaign and how they were working with the government to implement inclusion policies nationwide. James watched all this with a mix of pride and satisfaction. He approached Mark, who was standing by the bar. "It seems we've come a long way, don't you think, my friend?" James said. Mark nodded, his face illuminated by a smile. "And to think it all started with a misunderstanding at the door of this restaurant. Sometimes, James, I believe the universe has a peculiar way of teaching us lessons." "Indeed," James replied, "but what's important is what we do with those lessons." At that moment, an elderly man approached them. He was dressed simply but cleanly, and his face showed the wrinkles of a life full of experiences. "Excuse me," the man said with a trembling voice. "Are you James Miller?" James nodded, intrigued. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The man extended his hand. "I just wanted to thank you. A few months ago, I tried to enter this restaurant to celebrate my wife's birthday. We were turned away at the door because of our appearance. But last week, thanks to your campaign, we were able to dine here. It was the best gift I could give my wife on our 50th anniversary." James shook the man's hand, deeply moved. "Thank you for sharing your story. It's for people like you that we do this work." As the man walked away, James and Mark exchanged knowing looks. Without saying a word, they knew that all the effort, all the difficulties, had been worth it. Dinner continued in an atmosphere of camaraderie and celebration. Sarah, Henry, and David shared anecdotes from their experiences in recent months, laughing about the challenges they had faced and marveling at how much they had grown as people. At the end of the night, when the restaurant was almost empty, James stood up and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, capturing everyone's attention. "To second chances, to the power of change, and to the beauty of seeing beyond appearances. But above all, I want to toast to you, Sarah, Henry, and David. You have shown that a person's true character is not measured by their mistakes, but by how they learn from them and grow." Everyone raised their glasses, the clinking of crystal resonating in the quiet restaurant. As they left Golden Light that night, James paused for a moment to look back. The restaurant that had once been the scene of a painful incident now symbolized change and hope. "Everything okay, James?" Mark asked, noticing his friend's pause. James smiled, a determined gleam in his eyes. "Better than okay, Mark. This is just the beginning." And so, under the starry sky of the city, James Miller and his friends walked away from Golden Light, not as the discreet millionaire and disgraced employees they once were, but as a team united by a common mission: to make the world a more inclusive and respectful place, one person at a time. As they walked down the sidewalk, their laughter and conversations mingled with the nighttime sounds of the city, a city that, thanks to them, had begun to see beyond appearances and value the true essence of every human being. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.